The Galactic Council tortured a helpless human girl, a little cunt. They ripped off her fingernails, electrocuted her clit, and raped the shit out of her bleeding holes. When humanity found out, we knew our time had come. We had to revive our greatest warriors. They cracked the frozen sleep capsules open, icy fog hissing out. There lay our Terran Titanic super soldiers, jaws like vices, fists like boulders, muscles rippling like steel cables. They were 7 feet tall and 400 pounds of pure manhood. The Council may have fooled themselves into thinking we had forgotten about our past. But now they will see humanity's true face. Now they will cower in fear and tremble at the ferocity of our species. For we do not forgive and we never forget. David Bell, battle-scarred and hardened, strode into the Galactic Council chamber, his heavy boots echoing off the marble. The seated alien representatives fell silent, dozens of gleaming eyes tracking his approach with apprehension. "Why have you summoned me before the Council?" David growled, his fists clenched. The Lemnorian councillor Janus rose to his feet, his ornate headdress quivering. "Commander Bell, I am afraid we have grave news. Your adopted human daughter, Lily, she has been taken, abducted by the rogue warlord Zorgax." David's entire body tensed, rage and fear coursing through him. What are his demands? "He will torture the girl to death, unless we grant him dominion over the Antares sector," Janus said shakily. "This council is at an impasse, unwilling to concede, but unable to risk her life with a rescue." David slammed his fist on the podium, the wood cracking. "She is innocent. Just a fucking child." "I know, my friend," Janus whispered, "which is why in desperation I must beg you. Only a human has the brutality and strength to infiltrate Zorgax's fortress alone. Please, will you embark on this solo quest?" David gritted his teeth, sweat beading his brow. He and Lily were the last 2 humans left. If he failed, their species would be gone forever, wiped out. But she was his little girl, he had no choice. "I'll do it," he growled. "But if I succeed, humanity gets a permanent seat on this council. No more treating us like second-class citizens, swear it." "You have our word," Janus said solemnly. "Now go with the hope of all the galaxy. Bring your daughter home and usher in a new era for your kind." David turned on his heel and stormed from the chamber. It was time to dust off his old armor, to let the beast of war out of its cage. Zorgax had no idea what hell was coming for him. David's ship cut through the inky void of space, its engines roaring as he pushed them to their limits. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the controls, eyes fixed on the nav computer counting down to Earth's coordinates. "I'm coming, baby girl," he whispered, his heart twisting at the thought of Lily's terrified face. "Daddy's coming." The blue-green orb of Earth soon filled the viewscreen, but it was not the vibrant planet of old. The once verdant continents were now a mottled brown, the oceans a sickly grey. Centuries of war and neglect had taken their toll, leaving only ruins and desolation. David guided the ship to a remote mountainside, engaging the landing thrusters with a hiss of hydraulics. He emerged into the thin, frigid air, the crunch of his boots on rocky soil the only sound. Approaching a weathered outcropping, he pressed his palm against a hidden biometric scanner. With a rumble, a section of rock slid away, revealing a gaping tunnel into the mountain's heart. The underground bunker was a relic of a bygone age, its steel walls lined with flickering screens and humming machinery. David strode past them all, his focus singular. He came to a massive blast door, typing a code into the rusting keypad. The door groaned open, a gust of icy air billowing from within. The cryostasis chamber was cavernous, its vaulted ceiling lost in darkness. Rows upon rows of frosted pods stood in silent vigil, each containing a slumbering super soldier. David paused before the nearest one, wiping away the condensation to reveal the chiseled face within. These men and women were the pinnacle of human potential, genetically engineered and cybernetically enhanced to be the ultimate warriors, stronger, faster, smarter than any normal human could hope to be. They were Earth's greatest heroes and its darkest secret. David initiated the revival sequence, a deep thrum filling the air as the pods began to thaw. One by one they hissed open, spilling wisps of vapor. The soldiers emerged, blinking in the dim light, muscles coiled and ready. They snapped to attention as they saw David, saluting crisply. "At ease," David said, his voice hoarse. "It's been a long time." "David, is that you?" A bear of a man pushed to the front, his scarred face splitting into a grin. "I'd know that ugly mug anywhere." David clasped the man's beefy hand, a flicker of a smile on his lips. "Jack, should have known even a century on ice couldn't stop your mouth." Major Jack Reeves, David's brother-in-arms and closest friend. They had been through hell together, from the sweltering jungles of Taurus 9 to the blood-soaked trenches of the Zeta Prime campaign. If there was anyone David trusted to have his back, it was Jack. David turned to address the assembled soldiers, his expression grave. He told them of the Council's treachery, of Lily's abduction, of the impossible odds they faced, but he also spoke of hope, of the chance to remind the galaxy of humanity's strength to forge a better future for their species. As he spoke, he saw their eyes harden, their jaws clench. These men and women had been forged in the crucible of war, tempered by loss and sacrifice. They had seen firsthand the Council's disdain for humanity, the way they were treated as expendable fodder. "Lily is one of us," David said, his voice ringing with conviction. "And we take care of our own, no matter the cost." A resounding hoorah filled the chamber, the soldiers' voices echoing off the metal walls. They began to arm themselves, donning sleek exoskeleton armor that enhanced their already formidable strength and speed. They hefted plasma rifles that could punch through a tank, clipped invisibility cloaks to their belts, checked the charge on their energy shields. As they prepared to depart, a chime sounded from the command console. David frowned, striding over to tap at the flickering screen. An encrypted transmission, source unknown. He opened it warily and felt his blood run cold. It was a video feed, grainy and distorted, but David could make out Lily's terrified face streaked with tears and bruises. She was strapped to a metal chair, writhing against her bonds as shadowy figures loomed over her. One of them pressed a crackling shock baton to her neck, and her screams ripped through the speakers. David's vision tunneled, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. His hands shook with barely contained rage, the plastic console creaking beneath his grip. He wanted to put his fist through the screen, to rip Zorgax apart with his bare hands. "You've all seen what's at stake," he growled. "What we're fighting for. The Council thinks humanity is weak, that we're broken, but they're about to learn just how wrong they are." He strode towards the hangar where their ship awaited, the soldiers falling into step behind him. The lights gleamed off their polished armor, their faces set with grim purpose. "We're coming, Lily," David whispered, his hand tightening around his rifle's grip. "We're coming." The battered human ship dropped out of hyperspace, the once smooth hull now pockmarked with scorch marks and twisted metal. On the bridge, David gripped the controls, his eyes narrowed as Naxos loomed before them, a desolate rock of a planet. "There it is," he growled, "Zorgax's fortress." But before anyone could respond, the proximity alarm blared. The view screen lit up with a swarm of incoming fighter ships, their alien designs bristling with weapons. "Shit, it's an ambush," Jack yelled, strapping himself into the gunner's seat. "They must have known we were coming." David wrenched the ship into a sharp dive, laser blasts sizzling past. The human vessel shuddered as it took a glancing hit, sparks flying from overloaded consoles. "Evasive maneuvers," David barked, his fingers flying over the controls. "Jack, light 'em up." The ship's advanced targeting systems locked onto the enemy fighters, and Jack let loose with a barrage of plasma bolts. The humans' lightning reflexes and superior technology evened the odds, and one by one, Zorgax's ships exploded into fireballs. But it wasn't enough. A well-placed shot punched through their shields, alarms screaming as the engine room depressurized. Smoke poured into the bridge, the acrid stench of burning plastic filling their nostrils. "We can't take much more of this," Jack shouted over the cacophony. "We have to land now." David gritted his teeth, but he knew Jack was right. Pulling up hard, he aimed for a narrow canyon on Naxos's surface, the ship groaning under the strain. They hit the ground hard, metal screeching as they skidded to a halt in a cloud of dust. For a moment, there was only the hiss of cooling metal and the crew's ragged breathing. David unstrapped himself, wincing as he stood. He could feel the bruises forming from the brutal landing. "Damage report," he snapped, helping a dazed soldier to his feet. "Hull breach in the engine room, but containment fields are holding," the soldier reported, shaking his head to clear it. "Main power is down, but backups are online. Weapons are at half capacity." He strode to the communications console, punching in a code. "Janus, come in. We have a situation." The screen crackled to life, the counselor's face etched with worry. "David, what's happened?" "Zorgax knew we were coming," David said grimly. "He had an ambush waiting for us. We barely made it to the surface." Janus paled, his eyes darting as if checking for eavesdroppers. When he spoke, his voice was a hoarse whisper. "So you're right," he said urgently. "There are council members secretly loyal to Zorgax. I've been investigating, but I fear they're onto me. David, you must hurry. Zorgax's forces are already on their way to your location." The screen went dark, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. David slammed his fist against the console, his mind reeling. They were stranded on a hostile planet, their ship crippled, with an army bearing down on them. And Lily. God knows what Zorgax was doing to her. But he pushed down the fear, the despair. He was a soldier, damn it. He'd faced worse odds and come out on top. And he had his team, the finest warriors humanity had ever produced. "Listen up," he barked, the soldiers snapping to attention. "We've got a fight coming our way. Zorgax thinks he has us cornered, but we're going to show him what humans are made of. We're not just going to survive. We're going to make him regret the day he ever fucked with Earth." The soldiers nodded grimly, a fire igniting in their eyes. They knew the stakes, knew the price of failure, but they were ready. "Jack Simmons, Chen, set up a defensive perimeter around the ship. Use the terrain to your advantage. Miller, Nakamura, get to work on the engines. We need this bird flying again, ASAP." The soldiers moved like a well-oiled machine, each knowing their role. David watched them with a surge of pride. These were his people, his family, and he'd be damned if he let Zorgax take that away. As the sun began to set over the jagged horizon, painting the sky a blood red, David donned his own armor, the metal cool against his skin. He checked his rifle, the weight familiar in his hands. In the distance, he could see the dust cloud of approaching vehicles, could hear the thrum of alien engines. Zorgax's forces, coming to finish what they'd started. But the humans were ready. As the enemy troops poured into the canyon, the air shimmered as invisibility cloaks flickered to life. Plasma rifles hummed with barely restrained power. And then all hell broke loose. The humans opened fire, the night lit by searing blue bolts. Zorgax's soldiers fell in droves, their surprised shouts drowned out by the roar of gunfire. Jack was a one-man army, his rifle spitting death with each squeeze of the trigger. He moved like a ghost, the shimmering cloak making him almost impossible to track. Alien soldiers dropped like puppets with their strings cut, neat holes smoking in their heads. But for every enemy they felled, two more seemed to take their place. The humans were outnumbered and outgunned, fighting with the desperate strength of cornered animals. And then David heard a cry that made his blood run cold. Private Ryan, one of the youngest of the team, crumpled to the ground, clutching his gut. Blood seeped between his fingers, his face a mask of pain. "Man down," David roared, laying down a blistering cover fire as he sprinted to Ryan's side. The young soldier looked up at him, his eyes glassy with shock. "I'm sorry, sir," he whispered, his voice bubbling with blood. I don't think I can—" "You shut your mouth, soldier," David growled, hoisting Ryan over his shoulder. "We're not leaving anyone behind, not today, not ever." He ran back towards the ship, plasma bolts sizzling past his head. Two other soldiers fell in beside him, their rifles barking as they covered his retreat. They made it back to the ship, the ramp slamming shut behind them. The medic rushed forward, his face grim as he saw the extent of Ryan's injuries. He loaded the young soldier onto a gurney, wheeling him to the medbay. David slumped against the wall, his chest heaving. He could hear the clang of tools as the engineers worked frantically to repair the engines, could hear the distant booms of the battle still raging outside. He knew they couldn't hold out forever. Zorgax had them trapped, and it was only a matter of time before his forces overwhelmed them. They needed a new plan, a way to get to the fortress and rescue Lily before it was too late. But as he looked at the faces of his soldiers, battered and bloodied but still unbroken, he felt a flicker of hope. They were human. They didn't know how to quit, didn't know how to surrender. They would fight to their last breath, not just for Lily, but for the future of their species, for the chance to stand tall once again, to reclaim their place among the stars. David pushed himself to his feet, squaring his shoulders. He had a promise to keep, a little girl counting on him, and he'd walk through the fires of hell itself to bring her home. "Get ready to move out," he said, his voice rough with smoke and exhaustion. "We're not finished yet, not by a long shot." In the battered ship, David gathered his soldiers, his face grim. "We're out of time. We have to split up." He pointed at Jack. "Major, take half the team. Cause as much chaos as you can. Keep those bastards busy." Jack nodded, hefting his rifle. "We'll give 'em hell, sir." David turned to the rest. "You're with me. We're going in quiet. Get Lily out." The ship's ramp lowered, and Jack's team charged out, whooping battle cries. Plasma fire lit up the night as they engaged the enemy head-on. Under the cover of darkness, David led his squad toward the looming fortress. They moved silently, invisibility cloaks shimmering. As they neared the walls, a patrol of guards materialized, energy shields flickering. The humans' rifles sputtered uselessly against the barriers. "Shit," a soldier hissed. "What now?" David dropped his rifle and cracked his knuckles. "We get personal." He lunged, a blur of speed and power. His fist slammed into a guard's shield, the impact reverberating up his arm. The alien staggered. Spinning, David kicked out the guard's knee. As the shield faltered, he grabbed the alien's head and wrenched. The snap of bone was loud in the sudden silence. Around him, his soldiers surged into action. Punches and kicks flew in a lethal dance. Alien bodies crumpled to the dirt. Panting, they regrouped at the fortress entrance. David jacked into a terminal, his cybernetic implant interfacing with the alien system. Data streamed across his vision. "Got it," he grunted. "Cell block D, move." They plunged into the fortress, a labyrinth of steel and shadows. Their footsteps echoed down twisting corridors. An alarm shrieked to life, the sound stabbing at their enhanced eardrums. "They've made us," a soldier shouted. Around the corner, a phalanx of Zorgax's troops appeared, weapons raised. The humans dove for cover as plasma bolts filled the air. Huddled behind a pillar, David blind-fired his rifle. A scream told him he'd found a mark. "Push forward," he roared. Inch by blood-soaked inch they advanced, leaving a trail of twitching bodies. The cell block door loomed ahead. David kicked it open, rifle sweeping the room. And there was Lily huddled in a corner, her tear-streaked face a mix of fear and hope. "I knew you'd come," she whispered as he scooped her up. The sound of cruel laughter made him spin around. Zorgax stood there, flanked by hulking guards. The warlord's cybernetic eye gleamed red. "Bravo, human," he sneered. "You've done well, but not well enough." Zorgax raised a clawed hand, and a dozen rifles trained on David's head. "I've been listening to your precious council's chatter. I knew you were coming." He stepped closer, his massive frame dwarfing David. "Here's the deal. Join me, swear your loyalty, or—" He pressed a blaster to Lily's temple. She whimpered. David's finger tightened on his rifle's trigger, but he knew he couldn't outdraw them all. Not before Zorgax pulled the trigger. Jaw clenched, he met the warlord's gaze. The moment stretched, taut with tension. David's mind raced as he stared down the barrel of Zorgax's blaster. the alien warlord's finger twitching on the trigger. Lily trembled in the monster's grip, her eyes wide with fear. "Well, human?" Zorgax growled, his cybernetic eye glinting. "What's it going to be? Serve me or watch your precious daughter die?" David's jaw clenched. He couldn't let this bastard win, but he also couldn't risk Lily's life. There had to be another way. Slowly he began to lower his rifle, his muscles tense with coiled energy. "All right, Zorgax," he said, his voice low and steady. "You win. I'll join you." A cruel smile spread across Zorgax's face. "I knew you'd see reason, human. Now drop your weapon and—" But as David's rifle clattered to the floor, his other hand moved in a blur, activating a hidden communicator on his wrist. A burst of static screeched through the fortress's computer systems, the sound harsh and grating. Zorgax frowned, his head snapping towards the noise. "What did you do?" he snarled, his grip tightening on Lily. David didn't answer. He was too busy counting the seconds in his head. 3, 2, 1. Suddenly the fortress shuddered as its own defense turrets swiveled and opened fire, raking Zorgax's guards with searing plasma. The aliens screamed as they were cut down, their shields useless against the onslaught. Zorgax roared in rage, realizing he'd been tricked. He shoved Lily aside, raising his blaster to fire at David, but the human was already moving. David lunged forward, his fist slamming into Zorgax's face with bone-crushing force. The warlord staggered back, his shot going wide. All around them, chaos erupted as David's team sprang into action, engaging the remaining guards in a furious melee. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, mixing with the crunch of armored fists on flesh. David pressed his attack on Zorgax, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to dodge the alien's wild swings. He ducked under a vicious hook and drove his knee into Zorgax's abdomen, doubling the warlord over. But Zorgax was far from finished. With a bellow of rage, he charged forward, his massive frame slamming into David like a freight train. They crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs, trading brutal blows. Despite Zorgax's size and cybernetic augmentations, David refused to yield. He hammered his fists into the alien's face, feeling bone shatter beneath his knuckles. Zorgax roared in pain, his blows becoming more desperate, more frenzied. Out of the corner of his eye, David saw one of his soldiers breach Lily's cell, scooping the terrified girl into his arms. The sight filled him with renewed strength, and he redoubled his efforts, pummeling Zorgax with relentless fury. The tide of battle was turning. Major Reeves and the diversion team stormed into the fortress, their rifles spitting plasma as they cut down the last of Zorgax's troops. The warlord's forces were crumbling, overwhelmed by the sudden reinforcements. Zorgax, seeing his impending defeat, let out a howl of rage. With a final desperate lunge, he slammed his fist into a hidden control panel on the wall. A klaxon began to blare, the sound deafening. David's eyes widened as he realized what the warlord had done. The fortress's self-destruct sequence had been activated. They had minutes, maybe less, before the whole place went up in flames. "Everyone out now," David roared, hauling himself to his feet. He snatched up Lily from the soldier's arms, cradling her close as he sprinted for the exit. The fortress shook around them, explosions ripping through its structure. Debris rained down from the ceiling as they ran, the heat of the flames licking at their heels. They burst out of the crumbling entrance just as a massive explosion consumed the heart of the fortress. The shockwave slammed into them, sending them tumbling to the ground. David curled himself around Lily, shielding her from the worst of the blast. Ears ringing, vision swimming, David staggered to his feet. The fortress was nothing more than a smoking ruin now, the twisted metal still glowing with heat. But they had made it. Lily was safe. Zorgax was dead. As the human ship blasted away from the planet's surface, David held his daughter close, his heart swelling with emotion. They had done the impossible, had snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. But their fight was far from over. The Galactic Council still needed to answer for their treachery, for their willingness to sacrifice an innocent child. David's jaw set as he stared out the viewport, the stars blurring into streaks of light. One way or another, humanity would have its due. Their place among the galaxy's powers would be secure. As David's ship docked at the Galactic Council's space station, he could feel the weight of their victory against Zorgax settling on his shoulders. The station's hangar was abuzz with activity, a sea of alien faces turning to gawk at the battered human vessel. David strode down the ramp, Lily cradled in his arms. His team fell into step behind him, their weapons still at the ready. They were met by a contingent of council guards, their postures stiff and wary. "Stand down!" David barked, his voice ringing with authority. "We're here to see the council." The guards exchanged uneasy glances, but they parted to allow the humans through. As they walked the gleaming corridors of the station, David could sense the tension in the air. News of their exploits had clearly spread. The council chamber was in an uproar as they entered. Representatives from a dozen species were shouting over each other, their voices rising in a cacophony of accusation and recrimination. At the center of it all sat Janus, his face drawn and haggard. "David!" he called out, rising to his feet. "Thank the stars you've returned." But before David could respond, Janus pulled him aside, his expression grave. "We need to talk in private." David handed Lily off to Jack, murmuring for him to keep her safe. Then he followed Janus into a side chamber, the door sliding shut behind them. "What's going on, Janus?" David demanded. "The council is in chaos." Janus ran a hand over his face, his shoulders slumping. "It's worse than we thought, David. Zorgax, he was just a pawn. There's someone else pulling the strings. Someone called the Overseer." David's blood ran cold. "Who is he? What does he want?" "I don't know," Janus admitted, "but he has spies everywhere, even on the council. And he's the one who orchestrated Lily's abduction. He's been manipulating us all." David's fists clenched at his sides. The thought of some shadowy figure targeting his daughter, using her as a pawn in their games, it filled him with a cold, seething rage. Janus nodded, his expression grim. "Be careful, David. The Overseer's influence runs deep. Not everyone will be on your side." David strode back into the council chamber, his posture ramrod straight. The babble of voices died down as he took the central podium, his gaze sweeping over the assembled representatives. "I come before you today with grave news," he began, his voice ringing out in the sudden silence. "The attack on my daughter, the manipulation of this council, it was all the work of a single individual, a shadowy figure known as the Overseer." The chamber erupted into fresh chaos, shouts of disbelief and anger echoing off the walls. David raised his hand, his expression thunderous. "I have evidence," he continued, holding up a data chip. "Transmissions between Zorgax and his master, proof of the corruption that has taken root in the very heart of this council." He slotted the chip into the podium, and a holographic display sprang to life. It showed a shadowy figure, their face obscured, giving orders to a kneeling Zorgax. The audio was damning, revealing the extent of the Overseer's influence and the complicity of certain council members. As the recording ended, the chamber was silent. The representatives stared at each other, suspicion and fear etched on their faces. And then all hell broke loose. A plasma bolt sizzled past David's head, scorching the wall behind him. He dove to the side, his reflexes kicking in as more shots rang out. Council guards, their eyes glazed and vacant, were opening fire on the humans. And in their midst, a group of representatives were rising to their feet, energy weapons in hand. "Kill them!" one of them shouted, his voice twisted with hate. "Kill the humans!" David's team reacted instantly, returning fire as they sought cover behind the council seats. The staccato bark of human rifles mixed with the sizzle of plasma, the air filling with the stench of ozone. David saw Lily huddled behind a overturned table, Jack crouched protectively over her. A guard was advancing on them, his weapon raised. David leapt forward, tackling the guard to the ground. They grappled furiously, rolling across the floor in a tangle of limbs. David felt the guard's hands close around his throat, squeezing. A shot rang out and the guard went limp. David looked up to see Janus standing over them, a smoking blaster in his hand. Together they rallied the loyal council members, those who had not fallen thrall to the overseer. The battle was fierce, the chambers echoing with the sounds of combat. And then a cry of pain. David turned to see Janus staggering, a dark stain spreading across his chest. An assassin stood over him, a wicked-looking blade in hand, ready to strike at Lily. David moved faster than he ever had before. He caught the assassin's wrist, the blade inches from Lily's face. With a roar of fury, he wrenched the assassin's arm back, the snap of bone lost in the chaos. The battle seemed to last an eternity, but in reality it was over in minutes. The loyal guards and council members, rallied by David's leadership, cut down the last of the traitors. In the aftermath, the chamber was a scene of carnage. Bodies littered the floor, the air thick with the copper tang of blood. Janus lay unmoving, his chest still. Medics rushed to his side, frantically working to staunch the bleeding. David stood amidst the wreckage, Lily clinging to his leg. His team was battered and bloody but alive. They had won the day, but at what cost? The remaining council members gathered around him, their faces a mix of awe and respect. They had seen firsthand the strength and valor of humanity, the lengths they would go to protect their own. "Commander Bell," one of them said, her voice shaking, "the council is in your debt. We cannot begin to apologize for the actions of the traitors in our midst." David's jaw tightened. "I don't want your apologies," he growled. "I want action. The overseer is still out there, and as long as he is, none of us are safe." The council members exchanged glances, then nodded as one. "Then we grant you emergency powers," the spokeswoman said. "Find this overseer. Bring him to justice. You have the full support of this council." David's eyes gleamed with a hard light. The battle had been won, but the war was just beginning. He turned to his team, his gaze sweeping over their determined faces. "Gear up," he said, his voice grim. "We've got work to do." David's eyes gleamed with a hard light. The battle had been won, but the war was just beginning. He turned to his team, his gaze sweeping over their determined faces. "Gear up," he said, his voice grim. "We've got work to do." In the aftermath of the chaos in the Galactic Council chambers, David and his soldiers wasted no time. They dragged the captured councillors loyal to the overseer to a makeshift interrogation room, the air heavy with tension. David circled the captives, his boots echoing on the metal floor. He nodded to Sergeant Chen, who stepped forward with a gleaming neural scanner. The device hummed to life, tendrils of electricity arcing between its prongs. "So you're going to tell us everything you know about the overseer?" David growled, his eyes boring into the captives. "Or things are going to get unpleasant." The scanner whirred as it passed over the councillors' heads, their thoughts and memories laid bare. They writhed in their restraints, teeth clenched against the invasion. And then a breakthrough. One of the captives, his defenses crumbling, spat out a series of coordinates. "Xenox Prime," he gasped, sweat beading his brow. "That's where you'll find the bastard." David's fist slammed into the arm of the captive's chair, the metal denting under the blow. "If you're lying—" But the coordinates checked out. Xenox Prime, a remote, uncharted world on the fringes of known space, the perfect place for the overseer to hide. As the team geared up for the mission, the door to the armory hissed open. David turned, reaching for his rifle, but froze when he saw who stood there. Private Ryan, his young face determined, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. "I'm coming with you, sir." But Ryan stepped forward, his chin jutting defiantly. "With respect, sir, I am ready. I owe it to Janus, to all of us, to see this through." David studied the young soldier, seeing the fire in his eyes. He recognized that look. He'd seen it in the mirror often enough. The need to prove oneself, to fight for something bigger. "All right," he said finally. "Suit up." The journey to Xenox Prime was fraught with peril. The team navigated through treacherous asteroid fields, the chunks of rock slamming against their hull. They skirted the edge of black holes, their gravity threatening to drag them into oblivion. All the while they kept a wary eye on their scanners, watching for any sign of the Overseer's patrols. But they made it through, the planet's mottled surface filling their viewscreen. As they descended through the atmosphere, David felt a sense of unease wash over him. There was something wrong about this place, a darkness that seemed to seep into his very bones. They landed in a barren stretch of rocky terrain, the sky above a sickly green. As the ramp lowered, they were hit by a blast of fetid air, the stench of decay and toxins. "Helmets on," David ordered, sealing his own with a hiss. "Let's move." They trekked through the hostile landscape, their boots crunching on the cracked earth. Strange, twisted plants clawed at their ankles, thorny vines lashing out as if with a will of their own. In the distance, they could hear the eerie cries of alien predators, their forms hidden by the haze. Suddenly the ground erupted around them, geysers of noxious gas spewing into the air, and from the billowing clouds figures emerged, the Overseer's mercenaries, their armor sleek and deadly. Plasma bolts filled the air as the two sides opened fire, the humans diving for cover behind jagged boulders. But the mercs had the advantage, their weapons more advanced, their numbers greater. David gritted his teeth, popping up to squeeze off a burst from his rifle. A merc went down, a smoking hole in his chest, but two more took his place. And then, through the chaos, David saw Ryan break from cover, a primal yell tearing from his throat. The young soldier charged at the nearest merc, ducking under a plasma bolt and tackling the alien to the ground. They grappled in the dirt, Ryan's knife flashing as he drove it into the gaps of the merc's armor. The alien howled, clawing at Ryan's face, but the soldier did not relent. With a final savage twist, Ryan ended the merc, the alien's body going limp. He rolled to his feet, plasma rifle in hand, and opened fire on the remaining mercs, his shots precise and deadly. Emboldened by Ryan's display of raw courage, the rest of the team surged forward, pressing the attack. They used the terrain to their advantage, setting traps and ambushes, whittling down the mercs' numbers. And then it was over. The last merc fell, a smoking crater where his head had been. The team regrouped, checking wounds and reloading weapons. Ryan nodded, his face grim. "Just doing my job, sir." They searched the bodies of the fallen mercs, looking for any clue to the Overseer's location, and there, clutched in the hand of the leader, they found it, a small, crystalline data chip. David slotted the chip into his wrist computer, a holographic map springing to life. It showed a warren of tunnels and chambers snaking deep beneath the planet's surface. "Bingo," he said, a predatory grin spreading across his face. "Let's pay the Overseer a visit." The entrance to the underground facility was well hidden, camouflaged against the rocky hillside. But with the map as their guide, David and his team found it, a heavy blast door set into the stone. Major Reeves stepped forward, placing a breaching charge against the door's hinges. The team took cover, bracing themselves. The charge detonated with a thunderous boom, the door blasting inward. Smoke poured from the opening, alarms blaring from within. They were met by a hail of plasma fire, the Overseer's defenders laying down a withering barrage. The team returned fire, leapfrogging from cover to cover, advancing down the tunnel. Automated turrets emerged from the walls, their targeting lasers painting the human's armor. But Sergeant Chen was ready, his cybernetic arm morphing into a crackling EMP projector. With a pulse of electromagnetic energy, he fried the turret's circuits, rendering them useless. Deeper and deeper they pushed, fighting past traps and ambushes, the resistance growing more fierce with each step. It was clear that the Overseer was determined to keep his secrets, no matter the cost. And then they reached the heart of the facility, a vast cavernous laboratory, filled with banks of humming equipment and glowing tanks, and floating in those tanks. "My God," Reeves breathed, his face going pale. "Are those—" David stepped forward, his heart pounding. He recognized the faces in the tanks, the faces of soldiers long thought lost. Humans, their eyes blank and lifeless, wires and tubes snaking from their bodies. "The missing soldiers," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "The ones the Overseer took. He's been experimenting on them, trying to control them." A cold laugh echoed through the chamber, a figure stepping from the shadows. The Overseer, his face hidden beneath a sleek, featureless mask. "Impressive, isn't it?" he said, his voice a metallic rasp. "The power to bend the human mind to my will, to create an army of perfect, obedient soldiers, and now, with the knowledge I have gained, I will extend that control to the entire galaxy." David raised his rifle, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Not if we have anything to say about it, you sick bastard." The Overseer laughed again, a cold, cruel sound. "You really think you can stop me? You, a handful of primitive apes against the might of my—" His words were cut off as David's rifle barked, a plasma bolt slamming into the Overseer's chest. The masked figure staggered but did not fall. "You'll have to do better than that," he sneered, his hand rising. A wave of force slammed into the humans, sending them flying back. And then all hell broke loose. The Overseer's guards poured into the room, plasma flying as they engaged the humans. David rolled to his feet, taking aim at the Overseer once more. But the masked figure was gone, vanished into the chaos of the battle. David swore, spinning to fire at a guard who had Ryan in his sights. The young soldier was fighting like a man possessed, his rifle spitting death as he covered Chen's approach to the mind control equipment. The sergeant's fingers flew over the controls, trying to shut down the system, to free the captive soldiers. Reeves and the others formed a perimeter, holding back the tide of guards. But they were outnumbered, outgunned. It was only a matter of time. And then a miracle. The tanks began to drain, the soldiers within twitching and spasming as they were freed from the Overseer's control. Their eyes snapped open, awareness flooding back. It was a fighting retreat, the newly freed soldiers joining the fray as they made their way back through the tunnels. The Overseer's guards dogged their every step, plasma bolts filling the air. David was the last aboard, laying down a final burst of fire before slamming his fist into the ramp controls. As it hissed shut, he turned to face his team, his chest heaving. They were battered, bloodied, but alive, and they had struck a blow against the Overseer, had freed his victims from his vile control. But David knew this was only the beginning. The Overseer was still out there, still a threat, and he would stop at nothing to see humanity crushed beneath his heel. As the ship blasted away from Xenox Prime, David clenched his fist, a fire burning in his eyes. The hunt was on. The ship shuddered as it blasted through the atmosphere, the planet's toxic clouds swirling in its wake. In the main hold, the rescued soldiers sat huddled, draped in blankets, their faces haunted. Field medics moved among them, checking vitals, administering what treatments they could. David watched them, a mix of emotions warring within him. Relief that they had been saved, anger at what had been done to them, and a grim determination to make sure it never happened again. "We're running on fumes," Reeves reported, running a hand over his close-cropped hair. "That dogfight in the atmosphere drained our reserves. We'll need to set down for repairs and refuel before we can make the jump back to Council space." David nodded, his mind already racing. Every delay was another chance for the Overseer to slip away, to vanish into the shadows once more. But they had no choice. "Find us a safe harbor," he ordered, "somewhere off the grid where we can lay low and lick our wounds." Reeves saluted, moving off to confer with the navigator. David turned back to the rescued soldiers, his eyes falling on a familiar face. Sergeant Hawkins, one of the first to go missing, a good soldier, a friend. David had mourned him, had raised a toast in his memory, and now here he was, alive. But at what cost? "Easy, soldier," he murmured. "You're safe now." Hawkins clutched at his arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "David," he rasped, his voice a hoarse whisper, "you have to listen." David leaned closer, his brow furrowed. "I'm here, Hawkins. What is it?" The sergeant's eyes were wild, fever-bright. "The Overseer, his plan, it's worse than we thought. He's not just after soldiers. He's after everyone." A chill ran down David's spine, a creeping dread. "What do you mean?" Hawkins shuddered, his face twisting in pain. The mind control, it's not just for us. He's developing a way to broadcast it, to enslave entire planets at once. He's going to... The sergeant convulsed, his eyes rolling back in his head. The medics rushed forward, pushing David aside as they worked to stabilize him. David stepped back, his mind reeling. The scope of the Overseer's plan, the sheer audacity of it, it was almost too much to comprehend. But he had to find a way to stop it, to prevent this madman from enslaving the galaxy. He looked up as Private Ryan approached, the young soldier's face etched with concern. "Is he going to be okay?" Ryan asked, nodding to Hawkins. David's jaw tightened. "He'll live," he said. "But the things he's seen, the things that were done to him, that's not a wound that heals easily." Ryan nodded, his eyes haunted. "I can't imagine what it must have been like to be under that thing's control, to be a prisoner in your own mind." David clapped a hand on the younger man's shoulder, giving it a squeeze. "But he fought it," he said. "They all did. Even with the Overseer in their heads, they never stopped resisting. That's the strength of the human spirit, Ryan. That's what we're fighting for." The ship shuddered again, the deck plating vibrating beneath their feet. David turned to the viewport, watching as they descended towards a small, nondescript moon. It was little more than a barren rock, its surface pockmarked with craters and jagged canyons. But it was remote off the beaten path, a place where they could catch their breath, plan their next move. And after the horrors of Xenox Prime, that sounded like paradise to David. As the ship settled onto the moon's surface, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, of determination. They had won a battle, yes, but the war was far from over. The Overseer was still out there, his plan still in motion, and David would not rest until he was found, until he was brought to justice for his crimes against humanity. No matter where he hid, no matter how deep he burrowed, David would hunt him down. He would follow him to the ends of the galaxy, would tear apart every secret base and bolt hole until the monster had nowhere left to run. For he was human, and when one of their own was threatened, when the lives and freedom of innocents hung in the balance, there was nothing a human wouldn't do. The Overseer had picked the wrong species to fuck with, and now he would learn the depths of that mistake, would feel the wrath of all mankind brought to bear against him. As the ramp lowered and the battered soldiers of Earth stepped out onto the barren moon, David could feel the weight of that responsibility settling on his shoulders. The fate of the galaxy, the future of his species, it all rested on him now. But he would not falter, he would not fail, for he carried the hope and fury of all humanity within him, a fire that would never be extinguished. The hunt was on, and the Overseer's days were numbered. David gritted his teeth, his mind racing as he surveyed the laboratory filled with enslaved humans. The sight sickened him, stoking the fires of his rage. He turned to his team, his voice low and urgent. "We split up here," he growled. "Reeves, Ryan, you take half the squad and find a way to free these poor bastards. The rest of you, with me. We're going after the Overseer." The team nodded, their faces grim with determination. They knew the stakes, knew the price of failure. Reeves and Ryan peeled off with their group, moving towards the banks of flickering control panels. David led his team deeper into the facility, their weapons at the ready. They moved silently, ghosting through the shadows, alert for any sign of resistance. Suddenly a door ahead of them hissed open, and a group of mind-controlled soldiers shambled out, their eyes blank and lifeless. David's heart clenched at the sight of his brainwashed comrades, but he knew hesitation could be fatal. "Non-lethal only," he barked, switching his rifle to stun mode. "Take them down, but don't kill them." The team engaged the controlled soldiers, plasma bolts set to a low-power mode slamming into the mindless drones. The soldiers jerked and twitched as the stun blasts overloaded their nervous systems, dropping them to the floor in twitching heaps. David and his team were forced to give ground, falling back through the winding corridors of the facility. They took turns covering each other, one group laying down suppressing fire, while the other retreated to a new position. It was grueling, heartbreaking work, fighting against their own kind. But David and his soldiers didn't falter, their resolve unshakable. They would save their brethren, or die trying. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of claustrophobic battle, they reached the heart of the facility. The doors ahead of them were massive, ornate things, etched with alien glyphs that seemed to writhe and twist before their eyes. David glanced at his team, seeing his own exhaustion and determination mirrored in their faces. With a nod, he stepped forward, and the doors ground open with a shuddering groan. The chamber beyond was vast, its walls pulsing with sickly bioluminescence, and there, floating in the center of the room, was the Overseer. The alien was a nightmarish thing, a mass of writhing tentacles and pulsating flesh, its eyes a dozen glowing orbs set in a bulbous head, fixed on David with an almost amused malevolence. "Welcome, Commander Bell," the Overseer said, its voice a grating psychic whisper that scraped at the inside of David's skull. "I have been expecting you." David raised his rifle, his finger hovering over the trigger. "It's over, you bastard," he snarled. "Your little puppet show ends here." The Overseer laughed, the sound like nails on a chalkboard in David's mind. "Oh, you poor deluded ape," it sneered. "You have no idea of the true scope of my power." The alien's eyes pulsed, and David felt a sudden searing pressure behind his eyes. He grunted, shaking his head to clear it, but the Overseer's psychic assault was relentless. "I have guided the destiny of the galaxy for centuries," the Overseer gloated, its voice echoing in David's mind. "The Council, the wars, the very course of history, all have been shaped by my will." Images flashed through David's mind, a dizzying montage of galactic events, all tinged with the Overseer's sickening influence. He saw council members debating, their eyes glazed and empty as they parroted the Overseer's words. He saw armies clashing on distant worlds, the soldiers nothing more than puppets dancing to the Overseer's tune. "And now, Commander," the Overseer purred, "I offer you a choice. Join me, become my vessel, and together we will rule the galaxy. Your human mind combined with my psychic might, we will be unstoppable." David's lip curled in disgust, revulsion rising in his throat at the very thought. "Go to hell," he spat. The Overseer's eyes narrowed, its psychic grip tightening around David's mind. "So be it," it hissed. "Then you will die, and your pathetic species with you." The pressure in David's head intensified, a white-hot spike of agony that drove him to his knees. He could feel the Overseer's will boring into him, seeking to crush his resistance, to shatter his very identity. But David was human, and if there was one thing humans knew how to do, it was fight. With a roar of defiance, he pushed back against the Overseer's psychic onslaught, his own will a shield of adamant resolve. He thought of Lily, of the brave men and women fighting by his side, of all the billions of lives counting on him. He would not fail them. He would not submit. The Overseer's eyes widened in surprise as it felt David's resistance, its psychic grip faltering for a moment, and in that moment David surged to his feet, his rifle snapping up to aim squarely at the alien's hideous face. But before he could pull the trigger, a fresh wave of agony slammed into him, driving him back to his knees. The Overseer loomed over him, its tentacles writhing in sadistic glee. "Impressive, Commander," it sneered, "but futile. You are but one mind, and I am legion. You cannot hope to prevail against me." David's vision swam, blackness eating at the edges of his sight. He could feel his strength failing, his will crumbling under the relentless assault. The Overseer was right. Alone, he was no match for the alien's psychic might, but he was not alone. With a last desperate effort, David cast his mind out, reaching for the newly freed humans elsewhere in the facility. He could feel them, their minds raw and bruised from the Overseer's control, but still strong, still unbroken. "Help me," he pleaded, his psychic voice a whisper of desperate hope. "Lend me your strength, your will. Together we can end this nightmare." For a moment there was silence, a terrible yawning void where the Overseer's laughter echoed, and then like a rising tide David felt them answer. One by one, then by the dozen, then by the 100, The freed humans joined their minds to David's, a brilliant web of psychic energy that pulsed with the unbreakable strength of the human spirit. He raised his hand, his fingers splayed, and a bolt of pure psychic energy leapt from his palm, slamming into the overseer with the force of a collapsing star. The alien screamed, its flesh sizzling and bubbling as the psychic blast tore through it. Again and again David struck, each blast fueled by the combined will of every human in the facility. The overseer thrashed and writhed, its tentacles flailing in agony as it was slowly, inexorably unmade. And with a final shattering psychic scream, the overseer exploded, its very essence torn apart by the power of the human onslaught. The backlash was tremendous, a tidal wave of psychic energy that washed over David and the others, threatening to drown them in its turbulent wake. But they held fast, their minds locked together in an unbreakable chain of solidarity and strength. And as the psychic storm finally subsided, David stood tall amidst the smoking ruin of the overseer's inner sanctum, his team by his side, the freed humans behind him. They had done it, against all odds, against an enemy that had controlled the very fabric of galactic society. They had emerged victorious. But as David looked out over the shattered remains of the facility, he knew their fight was far from over. The overseer may have been defeated, but its legacy remained, a cancer that had spread through the stars, corrupting and controlling. It would be up to David and his fellow humans to root out that corruption, to rebuild the galaxy into something better, something stronger. It would be a long fight, a hard fight. But they were human, and if there was one thing humans knew how to do, it was fight. As the dust settled in the ruins of the overseer's inner sanctum, David and his team wasted no time. They fanned out through the shattered facility, scouring every console and data node for evidence of the aliens' crimes. Major Reeves took point, his cybernetic eye gleaming as he interfaced with the complex's mainframe. "I'm in," he reported, his fingers flying over a holographic keyboard, downloading all files related to the overseer's experiments and council communications. Across the room, Sergeant Chen and Private Ryan were freeing the last of the captive humans from their holding cells, the haunted looks in their eyes a testament to the horrors they had endured. David oversaw the operation, his mind already racing ahead to their next steps. They had struck a major blow against the overseer, but he knew the fight was far from over. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet heaved, throwing them off balance. Alarms blared to life, the facility's emergency lighting bathing everything in a pulsing red glow. "What the hell was that?" Reeves shouted over the din. David's eyes widened as he saw a countdown begin on the main view screen, the numbers ticking down with merciless speed. "It's a self-destruct sequence," he realized with a surge of dread. "The overseer must have triggered it as a final, 'fuck you.' We need to evacuate now." The team sprang into action, herding the disoriented freed captives towards the exit. But as they reached the corridor leading to the surface, they found their path blocked by a phalanx of mind-controlled soldiers, their eyes blank and weapons raised. "Damn it, we don't have time for this," David growled, raising his rifle. "Chen, Ryan, get those civilians to the extraction point. We'll hold them off." The two soldiers nodded, shepherding the captives down a side passage, as David and Reeves opened fire on the advancing thralls. Plasma bolts filled the air, the stench of ozone mixing with the acrid tang of smoke. Despite the press of enemies, David felt a surge of fierce pride as he saw Ryan take charge of the evacuation, the young private barking orders with a confidence beyond his years. The kid had come a long way from the green recruit he had been just weeks ago. Step by blood-soaked step, David and Reeves fought their way to the surface, the timer in their heads counting down with each hammering heartbeat. The ground bucked and shuddered beneath them, deep cracks spiderwebbing across the walls. As they burst from the facility's main entrance, they were met by a scene of utter chaos. The planet was tearing itself apart, massive fissures opening in the earth, geysers of molten rock spurting into the air. In the distance, they could see their ship, its engines flaring as it lifted off, the last of the evacuees clambering aboard. "Cutting it a little close, aren't we?" Reeves quipped as they sprinted for the waiting ramp. the heat of the planet's death throes searing their lungs. They leaped aboard just as the ship rocketed into the sky, the ramp slamming shut behind them. Through the viewports they watched as Xenox Prime shuddered and convulsed, the facility collapsing in on itself like a house of cards. And then, with a blinding flash, the planet exploded. Reduced to an expanding cloud of debris in an instant, the shockwaves slammed into their ship, sending them tumbling end over end, alarms screaming in protest. But they had made it, battered and bruised but alive. David sagged against the bulkhead, his adrenaline-fueled strength draining away. Around him, his team and the rescued captives huddled together, shell-shocked and exhausted. The cost had been high, the losses painful. But they had struck a blow for humanity, had brought a glimmer of hope to a galaxy too long oppressed. As the ship limped its way back to Earth, David gathered his soldiers, his eyes solemn as he looked out over their weary faces. "I won't lie to you," he said quietly. "The road ahead will be hard. We've kicked the hornet's nest, and there will be consequences. But we've also shown the galaxy what humanity is capable of, that we will not be broken, will not be enslaved." His gaze fell on Ryan, the young man standing tall despite the blood and grime caking his armor. "Corporal Ryan," David said formally, the pride clear in his voice. "Your bravery and leadership today were exemplary. I know Janus would be proud." As Ryan straightened, his eyes shining with emotion, David felt a flicker of hope amidst the uncertainty ahead. They had a long way to go, but with soldiers like these at his side, he knew they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. He turned as a chime sounded from the comm console, Janus's face appearing on the screen. The counselor looked haggard, his eyes shadowed, but there was a fire in his gaze as he spoke. "David," he said urgently, "you need to get back here fast. The Overseer's fall has sent shockwaves through the Council, and the old order is crumbling. There are riots on a dozen worlds, uprisings against the corruption that has festered for so long." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "But there are also those who see this as an opportunity, who seek to fill the power vacuum left behind. We need a steady hand at the helm, someone to guide the galaxy through this transition. We need you, David." David felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders, the burden of the trust being placed in him. He knew the path ahead would be fraught with peril, that there would be those who sought to undermine him, to cling to the old ways. But he also knew he could not turn his back on this chance, this opportunity to forge a better future for all species. To build a galaxy where the strong protected the weak, where justice and freedom reigned supreme. He met Janus's gaze, his jaw set with determination. "I'm on my way," he said, the words a vow. "Humanity will not let you down. Not this time." As the transmission ended, David turned to his team, his brothers and sisters in arms. They had been through hell together, had forged bonds stronger than steel in the crucible of battle. And now they would face their greatest challenge yet. Not as soldiers, but as leaders, as architects of a new galactic order. It was a daunting prospect, but as David looked out at the stars streaking past the viewport, he felt a flicker of something he had not felt in a long time. Hope? Hope for a brighter tomorrow, for a future where his daughter could grow up free from fear and oppression. And with that hope burning in his heart, David set his course for the Galactic Council, ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead. As the battered ship descended through Earth's atmosphere, David stared out the viewport, his mind still reeling from the events of the past few days. The Overseer's defeat, the revelation of the Council's corruption, the liberation of the human captives. It was almost too much to process. Janus pushed through the crowd, his face lined with exhaustion but his eyes shining with pride. He clasped David's hand, his grip firm. "You did it," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You exposed the truth and freed us all from the Overseer's influence. The galaxy owes you a debt that can never be repaid." David nodded, too tired to speak. He glanced at his team, seeing the same weariness etched on their faces. They had been through hell, had lost friends and comrades, but they had emerged victorious, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. As they made their way through the throng of well-wishers, Janus pulled David aside, his expression grave. "I'm afraid the fight is not over," he said quietly. "The power vacuum left by the Overseer's defeat has emboldened those who were once oppressed by the Council. They seek to overthrow the existing order, to seize control for themselves." David frowned, a sense of unease settling in his gut. He had seen firsthand the cycles of oppression and rebellion that plagued the galaxy, the endless tug-of-war for power and control. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice heavy with fatigue. "We broker peace," Janus said firmly. "We bring the factions to the negotiating table, find a way to balance the needs of all. It will not be easy, but it is the only way to prevent more bloodshed." David nodded, his resolve hardening. He turned to his team, seeing the same determination in their eyes. They were soldiers, warriors forged in the heat of battle, but they were also peacemakers, willing to do whatever it took to bring stability to the galaxy. For weeks they worked tirelessly, shuttling between worlds, meeting with leaders and diplomats. They listened to grievances, mediated disputes, and sought common ground. But the resentment ran deep, the wounds of centuries not easily healed. The rebel coalition, a patchwork of alien races united by their shared oppression, refused to back down. They demanded sweeping changes, a complete overhaul of the Council and its institutions. Negotiations broke down, and the galaxy teetered on the brink of civil war. David paced the council chambers, frustration and despair warring within him. They had come so far, had sacrificed so much. He could not let it all be for nothing. "We have to keep trying," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "We have to find a way to make them see reason." Janus shook his head, his expression grim. "I fear reason has left the building, my friend. The rebels are blinded by their anger, their desire for vengeance. They will not rest until they have burned the old order to the ground." David slammed his fist on the table, the sound echoing through the chamber. "Then we fight," he growled. "We fight to protect the peace we have worked so hard to build." And fight they did. The human soldiers found themselves on the front lines once again, their unique skills and adaptability making them invaluable assets on the battlefield. They fought alongside allied alien races, species they had once viewed with suspicion and fear. In the trenches and foxholes, bonds were forged, a camaraderie born of shared hardship and sacrifice. They swapped stories and rations, learned each other's customs and beliefs. And slowly the barriers of prejudice and mistrust began to crumble. But the toll of war was heavy. David's team suffered losses. Good soldiers cut down in the prime of their lives. Some of the recently freed human captives, eager to prove their worth, fell in battle, their lives snuffed out, just as they had begun to taste freedom. Each death was a knife to David's heart, a reminder of the cost of his failure. He pushed himself harder, fought with a reckless abandon that bordered on self-destruction. And as the war dragged on, as the bodies piled up and the worlds burned, David began to question everything he had believed. The Council's methods, the very structure of the galaxy itself, it all seemed so flawed, so broken. He saw the same patterns repeating themselves, the same cycles of oppression and rebellion that had plagued the galaxy for centuries, and he knew that unless something changed, unless they found a way to break free from the weight of history, it would all happen again. In a moment of desperate inspiration, David reached out to the leaders of the rebel coalition, offering them a seat at the negotiating table. He proposed a radical restructuring of the Council, a complete overhaul of the system that had failed so many for so long. "We have to do better," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "We have to build a galaxy that works for everyone, not just the privileged few. A galaxy where all races have a voice, where the needs of the many come before the desires of the few." The rebel leaders were skeptical at first, their mistrust of the Council running deep, but as they listened to David speak, as they saw the sincerity in his eyes and the passion in his voice, they began to waver. And slowly, tentatively, they agreed to come to the table. The negotiations were long and arduous, marked by heated debates and tense standoffs. But through it all, David remained steadfast in his conviction, his belief in a better future unshakable. And finally, after months of hard-fought compromise and painstaking diplomacy, an agreement was reached. The war came to an end, the guns falling silent as a new era dawned. The Galactic Council was reborn, its ranks swelled by representatives from every corner of the galaxy. The old power structures were dismantled, replaced by a new system of checks and balances, a delicate equilibrium that ensured no one voice could dominate. David was hailed as a hero, a visionary who had brought peace to a war-torn galaxy. The Council offered him a leadership role, a chance to shape the future he had fought so hard to build. But he declined, his heart heavy with the weight of all he had seen and done. His place was with his fellow soldiers, the men and women who had bled and died beside him. He returned to Earth, to the quiet solitude of his childhood home. The scars of war were still fresh, the memories of fallen comrades still raw. But as he looked up at the stars, as he saw the glimmer of hope and possibility that now shone from every corner of the galaxy, he knew that it had all been worth it. The galaxy was entering a new era, a time of challenges and opportunities, and though the road ahead would be long and fraught with difficulty, David knew that the strength and resilience of the human spirit would see them through. For they had faced the darkest of times and emerged stronger, their bonds forged in the crucible of war. They were a family, a band of brothers and sisters united by a shared purpose and an unbreakable will. And together, they would face whatever challenges the future might bring, secure in the knowledge that as long as they had each other, there was nothing they could not overcome. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.